Welcome to Women Winning Divorce. I am your host, Heather Quick. I am an attorney, entrepreneur, author, and founder of Florida Women's Law Group, the only divorce firm for women by women. I love thinking big, thinking outside the box, creating creative solutions for women, and empowering women to win in all aspects of their life. Our approach at Florida Women's Law Group is to provide women with a strategy to not only achieve their objectives, but win at life. I believe that what may show up as adversity is simply an opportunity to change and improve your life. In each episode, I sit down with innovative professionals and leaders who are focused on how you can be your best self before, during, and after divorce. In these conversations, we are looking at how women can win at life. I have the unique opportunity to meet women when they are at a transition period of life. But that is only the beginning to becoming your best self and winning at life on your terms. With our guests, we enjoy the opportunity to explore ways all women can win and enhance their life, no matter where they are in their journey. Because divorce is just a point in life, not the end and not what defines you, rather a catalyst for your growth. Welcome to today's episode of Women Winning Divorce. I'm Heather Quick, owner and attorney, Florida Women's Law Group. And today we have the wonderful pleasure of being joined by Kasey Wagner, an attorney here in Jacksonville that practices in the area of personal injury, but that doesn't really fully describe all that she does. So Kasey, first, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
And please share with me and the listeners a little bit about how you got to becoming a personal injury attorney, because I find all of that fascinating.
Sure. So I kind of decided on this route while I was still in law school. I went to Wake Forest University in North Carolina. I'm originally from Florida, but I wanted to go out of state. So I went up there and then ended up staying there for law school. And I asked around about how do I get into a courtroom as quickly as possible, because I wanted to try cases and be in front of juries. And my options were what you do, which I had very little interest in because it's so like heavy and dramatic. And then criminal work, which I also didn't want to do. And then personal injury. So I started on the defense side for 5 years. That's where you get thrown to the wolves the quickest. And then I always had the plan of switching over to represent injured people. I just want to help. And these folks are dealing with horrible situations, and it's nice to be able to help them out and try and bring a little balance to the injustice of being a victim of negligence.
And so personal injury is really broad. So so our listeners know, I know you do have areas which you practice specifically. Tell us a little bit about that, please.
Sure. So I specialize in medical malpractice and nursing home abuse and neglect cases. So just over the years, I've kind of developed, especially the nursing home practice, which is kind of a subspecialty of medical malpractice. And it's just really, they're sad cases. A lot of them are wrongful death cases. And these families are they're going through the absolute worst thing that's probably ever happened to them as a family. And so it's just really, excuse me, it's really nice to be able to kind of guide them through the process and try and bring a little bit of change if possible. Sometimes when we settle cases, we write new provisions into an employee handbook or new policies and procedures at a nursing home. And so that's always really gratifying to feel like you're actually making some change.
Absolutely. And that's wonderful. Which I do believe that in that area of law, that's the way you have to do it. And a lot of times to hold them accountable and hopefully, change for the next person. So that's great. Thank you so much for sharing about that. So today for our listeners, Kasey, I'm just so thankful that you are on this show because you are not only an amazing person, but you are also a friend of mine, but you were a client of the firm, and you have graciously accepted our offer, our request to come on the show and talk a little bit about your experience with divorce.
Yes.
So I know, and I really, this is something that I have always been cautious in asking because it's very private, and I of course respect your privacy
and your life. And I know that it will be so helpful. I know that it will be so helpful to so many women because you have been through what they are either going through or thinking about going through. And so it's just very, very gracious of you to come here today and, share your experience. So,
Sure.
let's get into it, because I know so many people, so many of our clients, so many women, this is just a big step and it's really hard. And it comes with so many thoughts, feelings, and can take a really long time to get to the decision, right? Of, oh my gosh, am I going to actually reach out to an attorney about a divorce? And can you share a little bit? And you have an advantage, right? Because you've been to law school. Now, you shared with us, you didn't go to family law, but like, that doesn't mean that necessarily that I don't know if that equipped you anymore for what you were about to go through.
I think it did. I took family law, and of course, family law is on the bar exam, so you study it a little bit. And so I kind of knew the basics, more than just a regular Joe walking down the street, so to speak. But I think, if anything, that guided me to getting an attorney, because I knew how complicated it was and that I absolutely did not want to try and handle it myself. So I think if there's, you didn't ask for advice, but right out of the gate, my very first piece of advice for anybody thinking about this stuff is to pick up the phone and have that consultation with an attorney, because this stuff is just way too complicated. And you're also just so emotionally invested that you need that voice of reason to tell you when you're being unreasonable or what your next steps need to be. So I think that was, I think knowing what I didn't know guided me to pick up the phone and call you. And then, you were kind of talking about just getting to the point of trying to make the decision to do that. I think one thing, by the time I called you, I was ready, but I would tell women, pick up the phone before you're sure. There's nothing wrong with talking it through and saying, here's what's going on. And a lot of us are victims of gaslighting and things like that. So you may not realize that this is something you should be doing. So, I mean, we're attorneys at law, but we're also counselors at law, right? So I think I wish that I had reached out sooner, just to get some guidance on even separating, like, what are some steps? What are the ways that we should do this? How does it work? That kind of stuff.
And at what point was there, I know that, from clients and friends, I hear, there's a lot of thinking about it, right? And like you said, by the time, but you did decide. And in my experience and talking with so many women, there's usually the one thing that is like, I'm done, right? Like, a lot has built up. It's not just one thing, but there comes a point, I think, where that line's been crossed. I'm done. What was that like for you?
Yeah. So my entire experience was not unique, but I was dealing with a spouse with an alcohol addiction. And so it had been spiraling out of control for years. And he had an incident at work, ended up not having a job anymore at that point. And I looked at him and I said, look, you've got some time now, so let's make use of it. And he agreed to go to rehab. So he went to rehab out of state, and he was gone for 2.5 months. It was a long rehab process for him because he was very deep into the addiction situation. And I was fully prepared to live the rest of our lives when he got back together. And honestly, the rehab experience was amazing. He got sober, he was himself again. It was wonderful. And he came back and he relapsed about 6 weeks after getting home. And it just, for me, it was just like a light switch. It was just instantaneous. I was like, I am finished. I cannot ride this roller coaster. I'm done. And that for me was, so it was, and I will say, a lot of decisions in your life you look back on and second guess and wonder about. That decision that day to say, you're out of this house, was one that I had never questioned. It was absolutely the right thing to do. And I'm proud of it. It was hard, but I'm proud of it.
Yeah. And I am proud of you too. I've had many conversations and these are, I think if a listener hasn't personally been through it with somebody with substance abuse issues, they think it's so clear. It's not, right? When you're in it, it's not. And I've watched it, I've had a front row seat to this and the multiple rehabs that someone went through and it was still hard. And on the outside looking in from the outside, I didn't really understand. But finally, they made the break and that was my brother with his first wife. And it was painful to watch. It gave me an understanding of his side. It gave me a real understanding of the addict and the promises and the failed, things, the manipulation, a lot of things that I know he had a very, very hard time cutting it off. It took him a lot longer. And so that's where, I applaud you because you knew, and I think that goes because you said he'd been dealing with it for years, right? And you saw this rehab and that point as we're ready to start over. When that didn't work, I'm sure you're just like, okay, we're not going to do this.
Yeah, and we had little kids, and it was like, they're 6 at that point, I think, or maybe even 5. I can't remember, but I just couldn't have that instability for them.
Mm-hmm.
And I will say, it's an interesting thing because I think it's very easy if you're a listener right now to go, oh, well, I'm not dealing with the addiction problem. I've got other issues. But what's interesting and what they talked about, because I went up for a weekend to the rehab facility, they did like a family counseling weekend. And one of the things that is wild about addiction is that the addict is actually, it's the same thing as someone cheating. Yeah. Like they're not cheating with another person, but they are cheating on you and your family with the substance. Mm-hmm. And they do all the exact same things. They lie, they manipulate, they tell you you're crazy. I haven't been drinking, just like you're crazy. This isn't some other person's perfume you smell. It's very, very similar. And so the emotions of dealing with that, I think, are more universal than people might realize.
Mm-hmm. I appreciate that comment because the behavior is similar. The reasoning or the what the issue is might not be the same, but very much the behavior is similar. Now, now we represented you. Why did you choose us? I have to ask.
So, of course, I had met you in Leadership Jacksonville, and I know several family law attorneys in town, but I loved the angle that you only represent women. And I just felt like, for me, knowing you personally was a big part of it, of course, but also I just loved that it's an all-female staff. You only represent women. And I was like, okay, these ladies are going to understand my perspective and fight when needed, or be agreeable when that's appropriate.
Well, I do appreciate, because that is what we strive to do for sure. And, obviously meet you where you are and achieve your goals through the process. Now, for our listeners, because I know the answer to this, but, and you do too, but, regarding your ex-husband's addictions issues, did that add complications to the divorce process?
Holy cow, did it ever. Because you're dealing with somebody who, by that point, was barely functioning. I mean, so his own lawyer, you can't do discovery because he's not calling his attorney back and he's not signing this or that piece of paper. And and then that was part of it. But then also he would have these highs and lows and highs and lows emotionally, but also like moments of functioning with, and then 2 hours later, he's had a bunch to drink and he's in a completely different place than he was 2 hours before. And so, we would be texting about him seeing the children or whatever. And it would be a perfectly nice text exchange. And then like 2 hours later, I'd get a text where he's cursing at me and nothing happened in the interim. So you're just like, there were periods during the divorce process where I would talk to your office and say, I'm not going to speak to him. Everything's going to have to go through the lawyers. And then like the next day he'd be a little more functional, and I'd be like, no, it'll be easier just to deal with him. And so it definitely complicated things, I think.
And I think so it does. And that can be, again, like you said, it can be the substances without a doubt, but it can also be if somebody's got, some personality issues or things that are affecting them, because it's not the same person. Each time you have a conversation, that can make it difficult, right? To continue to move forward, because it's like one step or two steps forward, one step back. Like, it's just like you're not really continuously moving forward when somebody is emotionally unstable, which he was. I mean, obviously,
totally.
It affects your emotions, the substances. Were the two of you able to share custody of the children at this time? How was that for you?
I mean, so my whole thought, and this was with counseling from you and your attorney, your other attorneys in the office, I wanted during the divorce process to give him as much access as we could to the kids. My long-term plan was, once the divorce was final, to probably change that, whatever had been agreed to, because I just wanted to get us to the finish line, so to speak. And so I did let them go over. He had an apartment. They would go over and see him. We did a couple of overnights. He had decorated a guest room, bought some furniture. I mean, well, I think his family bought that stuff. I don't know if he actually did it or not. Right. But yeah, I mean, we were trying. I was trying to give him time with them, because I think that that's important.
Right.
It just, again, it's very difficult with somebody who's drinking. You just can't let them have your children. It's not safe. And so, we had an incident where he had a fall with the kids there. And when they told me what had happened, we kind of had to pull the plug. Mm-hmm. And so I called you guys that day, actually, and left a message, because it was the weekend, and said, I can't leave them with him anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And, that's the problem, right? The unpredictability and the unreliability, and your right. children and their safety. Fortunately, at least they're of an age, they're going to tell you. They may or may, and by that time, probably they knew something, because, kids
yeah.
Even though parents are like, oh, they don't know. It's like, oh, they always know. They do. They know more than I think we give them credit for.
Absolutely.
For sure. But we'll talk maybe a little bit about the supervised visitation and if that worked or not in the next segment. It is time for a quick break, so we will be right back. And listeners, if you are enjoying the show and think it would be helpful for others, we would greatly appreciate a 5-star review, and that will help others find us. We will be right back. Well, we're back from our break. And again, today I am joined by Kasey Wagner, and she is sharing with us her rather complex and interesting divorce story, as an attorney and also as one of our past clients. So I do want to step back, because I do want to talk about supervised visitation, because that often or always is our only other option. And what your experience is that, because it may or may not sound easy, but I know in reality, it poses a lot of challenges. And was that something you were able to do?
I offered it. We tried. Well, when I say we tried, I tried to tell him, there's places we can go. You can see them. I think the Family Nurturing Center was the place that I knew about. And I explained to him that you're going to have to be sober to go through the door. And so the response to that was that I was keeping him from his children, and I was a horrible person, and he never scheduled a single one. So after that fall was the last time they ever saw him. We'll get to that, but yeah.
Well, and let's get to that, because, and this is what makes this different. It was in the middle of the divorce process. I think we were still in the discovery phase, which is rather beginning. Like, we really hadn't gotten to negotiations at all. And he passed away.
Yeah. So it was a crazy situation, because when I would try to ferret out when he was higher functioning and try and have conversations that would move the ball forward. And so prior to him passing away, I had drafted up this document that I called a settlement outline, I think. And basically, it was just a bulleted 1-page, maybe 1.25-page document that just had bullet points and said, like, here's our plan for how we would handle the house. Here's our plan for alimony. I didn't want any. Here's the plan for child support. We'll follow the formula. Like, basically, I just put the law on the paper and said, I'll agree to this. And we both signed that. And then, but we had scheduled, so you're right, we were no real formal negotiations had happened. We were in the discovery phase, and we had a mediation set for August of 2021. And he then passed away in June. He just alone in his apartment, nothing. I mean, I think he truly just was so unhealthy from all the alcohol for all those years that his body just shut down. And so what was crazy was that his dad, I think to this day, blames me for what happened. That, you know, by kicking him out of the house and everything that followed, that led him to this outcome. And so his divorce attorney, he had never paid her bills. And so I don't know what they tried to sort out, but Todd's dad hired her to handle the estate, which was just a nightmare, because she just didn't know probate law at all, quite frankly. And so I had hired an attorney in town who specializes in probate work. And he was doing everything he could to try and explain the law to her, but she basically was trying to enforce this little written set of notes and say that money that, I guess, let me back up. There were a lot of retirement accounts. There wasn't a lot of cash on hand at that point because he wasn't working, but he had a lot of money in retirement accounts. And we had agreed that I would be entitled to half of the growth of those accounts that accrued during the marriage, which is my understanding. This is your area of expertise, but my understanding is that's pretty much what the law says. And so that's what we had agreed to. But he had never taken me off as the beneficiary of those accounts in the event of his death, which made sense because the divorce wasn't final.
Wasn't allowed to. You're not allowed.
Yeah, he wasn't allowed to
during the divorce, and that's just, I want to bring that up because often, and just, you know, that is something people will do when someone files for divorce, and you're not allowed to. There's orders that say you have to keep everything as status quo during the divorce in regards to that. So thankfully you still were, right?
Right.
You or the children, but you were still on it.
Yeah. And so basically the way it was going to work out was that all of that retirement money was going to get rolled into retirement accounts for me. Or basically I could have, cashed them out or whatever. But his family, his dad was furious about that. He did not want me to have any access to those funds. And so they tried to fight and say that we had a settlement that had been memorialized and that was enforceable. And so I talked with my probate attorney, and there's very little law on this. And so I felt like there was a risk that a judge might go with that argument. And so I ended up settling out with his dad by just foregoing some of that money. And then they ended up putting it in college accounts for our daughters that they're managing. So who knows if that money will be there when the girls go to college or not. I don't know. But that's kind of how that all worked out. It was pretty crazy.
Well, and when in divorce law and very similar probate, it's the family members very often who can get so heated, and then you add on to it your husband's substance abuse and all that. And I think many, you said a couple things like his parents or his father blamed you, and I think people think that, right? I mean, and I don't know if you went through that process. I know that I have heard that in the past from many clients, but if I leave, he's not, I'm the only one keeping this person alive because, they're doing this. And if I leave, he won't. But yet at some point you have to recognize that's not within your control. But I think those
Exactly.
are valid feelings. Like you feel it,
Yeah,
but it's just really not true. And I don't know if you ever went through that, where you thought, if I
oh,
do this.
absolutely. Absolutely. And I'll say that weekend again up at his rehab with professionals telling me, like, the whole first day was almost like college lectures. They had medical doctors, medical professionals telling us about the anatomy of the brain and how alcohol and substances affect that, and how an addict's brain is different than a regular person's brain. And then we had counseling sessions too. And it was so healthy to get all of that information and counseling to help me kind of digest it. But the takeaway for me from that weekend was the 3 C's. For family members dealing with people with these problems, it's you didn't cause it, you can't control it, and what was the other one? It's cause and control. And for some reason, I'm blanking on the third one. I'll have to think about it. But if it comes to me, I'll come back to that. But you didn't cause it, and you can't control it. And so I knew that me leaving, or asking him to leave the house is kind of how it worked in our situation, but us separating was not going to affect his trajectory. Like, his trajectory was his, and he had to own that. And whether I stayed and continued to coddle him and try and keep it together or not, he was going to continue down his path because it was his path. It wasn't mine to. So I think women take on way too much. We take on the responsibility for controlling and keeping the other person, and you have to let that go. They're an adult.
Did you ever, I imagine what you learned in that counseling and through that was eye-opening, and you probably, but you weren't ready, like, right? You guys, he was there, and that was, you got that information when certainly it was the right time. But I would imagine anyone who may be listening thinking, well, he hasn't gone to rehab, but getting some kind of counseling as far as that spouse of an addict is probably a really great idea to get some clarity on the situation from a professional counselor in that.
Yeah, absolutely. I started counseling while he was at rehab, and I continued it all the way through until 6 months after he passed away. And then I just kind of like reached a point where I felt like, now I would love, love, love to continue with counseling. I think everyone should be in counseling. But I'm super busy and I don't have time for it always. I mean, we all can make our excuses, but I also feel like I'm in a really good place right now. And I know that it's there if I need it. You don't necessarily have to go every single week, but if you got somebody on standby where you know that you can call if you need to, I think that that's huge. And I would say, if somebody's even listening to this podcast, like if they're finding this podcast helpful or or something that they need to be listening to, then they probably also need to pick up the phone and call a counselor.
I think so too. Well, it's just so complex. It is.
Yeah.
It's divorce in and of itself is, but when you add addiction, when you add personality issues, when you add anything else, there's a lot to sort out. And like you said, that manipulation, the gaslighting, like, it's very helpful to get clarity on your part in the situation and the reality of what is going on. That's why there are a lot of support groups for individuals in relationships with addicts, and understanding what that codependency means. And I think that, I don't know if that is that is the word that is used, but at least understanding.
Absolutely. I think it becomes like a part of your identity to take care of that person, I think. And so it's when you decide, I can't do this anymore and I need to move on, and we needed to get a divorce. And I think that's true whether they're an addict or not, right? Like, that's a big part of that separating is your identity is wife. And so who are you going to be when this when you're living on your own. And, I think that's what it's terrifying. And I think you have to really just kind of sit with that for a while and decide, like, this is scary, but I am strong enough to do it.
And I appreciate you saying that, Kasey, because you're one tough cookie, right? And so for you to be vulnerable and share that with our listeners, because you go in courtrooms, you take on big companies, when nobody would look at you and know you're afraid, but when it's personal, you lose that. You just can't. It's your life, and when you have children, I mean, I think that's a very real statement. It can be, and you knew it was the right thing, but it doesn't mean it's not scary of thinking what is it going to look like on the other side.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And I know a fear that has been expressed to me over the years is, but if we separate, how do I know my children will be safe? Because he's not going to stop. And you're telling me that that he's going to get an opportunity to be with the kids, right? I mean, that's certainly a fear I know that you had.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I hate to say it, but I have friends who are divorced and have to deal with time sharing. And they quite frankly, I mean, we joke about it, but it's really not a joke. They're kind of jealous. I mean, I hate to say that, but like, it's terrible. But for me, if he wasn't going to get better and really co-parent with me, then at least, I count myself as a little bit lucky, at least on that end, that I didn't have to continue to try to timeshare with someone who is in and out of functioning times. And, like, I had a recurring nightmare of him showing up drunk at a kid's soccer game, because my daughter plays soccer. And I had this like recurring nightmare of that happening. And then when he passed away, I literally never had the dream again. So there's so much fear involved in all of it. I was scared of separating. And then but I do see that it's a really tough thing to think about. Like, how do you relinquish some of that control? And you're going to have to share your kids with this person. And it's really, really frightening. But you kind of have to trust the process, I think, and know that if there really are safety issues, that can be dealt with.
Yeah. And I know we talked to you about it, or our attorneys, and that's why, because many times, our clients will come in a similar situation and they're going to say, but I don't want to bring that up. Right. I don't want to bring that up. Right. I don't want to disparage him. It's like, well, we got to bring it up, because otherwise the court they have the ability to do things, but they got to know what's going on. And it's about bringing it and using the resources that we have and within the process to, keep the children safe. And usually they either get, and I don't want to say better, or they either get sober or they don't. Right. Because there are tools that we have. And if they do, then yeah, it's constantly monitoring, but the courts can deal with that, or they don't, and they don't get to see their kids, and they don't all have that situation. And then it can be a bit of a roller coaster. It's like, well, when are they sober? When are they not? But the process is there.
I was shocked by the resources that were out there. Like, I almost bought him a breathalyzer. You can buy them online, and then they network to your phone, and you can be like, you could just text him and be like, blow right now. You guys were who told me about all that. He wasn't willing to do any of it. But
yeah, I was going to say, he wasn't excited about that, but you were like, there's so much out there to show, right, the technology in that area, with somebody in particular, if somebody's in recovery, and I've told many clients on the other side, like, if you know you have a problem, you're in recovery, there's a lot of ways that the court is going to support you, and there's ways to prove it, because you got to prove it, because there's been incidences. But all right, so we are, I could keep going on and on. We got to take another break. So we will be right back. And listeners, if this is your favorite part of the week, we would ask that you please subscribe so you don't miss any of our shows. And always, we do ask for a review and comments on topics that you would like to hear. We will be right back. We are back from our last break. And again, today I am joined by Kasey Wagner. And in the last two segments, we discussed losing a spouse or a former spouse, while you're in the divorce process, and in the fact pattern, when there's substance abuse, because that's a large part of what Kasey's journey was. And now, though, let's talk in this last segment about navigating life after the divorce process. Now, here's a tough question, Kasey, but I know you can handle it. Is it hard to balance keeping your late husband's memory alive for your kids, but also, keeping healthy boundaries and things for yourself?
Yeah, I would say that's probably one of the hardest challenges that I have to deal with going forward. So we did not go to the funeral. It was up in Virginia, and I just felt like the girls were too little to understand. And then we also had that whole, quite frankly, toxic relationship with his dad and that side of the family. And so it took a lot of counseling sessions for me to come to the conclusion that it would be okay for us to not go. I created a picture book for the girls, called My Days with Dad, and like on one of these websites. And I basically pulled every good picture that I could of it, our whole family, the four of us together, but also just him with them, put captions and dates, and they keep that in their room. And sometimes they do look at it. They're 10 now, but they do pull that out sometimes. But it's more just like the little day-to-day things that are a little bit tricky. Like they'll mention a fond memory, and then I say, I remember that was a fun day. But it's hard because, they don't really understand what I went through. And there's a lot of anger I still have, that I'm working through. I'm still mad at him for things. And that's okay. I've accepted and I give myself some space for that. But I definitely don't discuss it with the kids. And I think, you guys counseled me from the beginning, and I think it's important, whether the spouse is alive or not, you try to wear the white gloves around the children. You don't badmouth that other person, whether they're still around or not. And let the kids grow up, and then you can talk when they're adults about what really was happening, maybe.
Mm-hmm. I think that's true, because there comes a point when they are going to be, it'll still be hard to hear, but they're going to be old adults to where maybe they can understand in a bit more. And by that time you will have had that space and that ability to heal. And you're going through all this, but in a mother, now a single mom, and a very busy attorney. How did you keep yourself sane and balance? That's a lot, that's a lot.
Yeah.
I guess, do you have your support, your support systems available to help you through that?
Yeah.
Find some.
Exactly. I've got a good group of friends here. My mom and my stepdad live in Tallahassee, so not too far down the road, but definitely not here for day-to-day help. So, I'm very blessed to have the finances to be able to hire some help. And I relied on that a lot and to this day, I actually, I think a lot of moms, we question if we're using a babysitter too much, and we feel guilty when we're out having fun, but it's important. That is self-care too, to go out with your friends and have some time away, to be an adult. And so I think I threw myself into working out. I got a personal trainer at one point. Actually, kind of funny story about that really quick. But when he went to rehab, there was so much more money in the bank account because he wasn't spending, and I'm not kidding, $100 a day on booze, that I was like, where's all I could get a personal trainer with this cash. So I started training, and then ended up, I think, doing Orange Theory for a while, but that was a big part of it. So counseling and keeping yourself healthy, those were huge. But yeah, and now I'm like back to the old ways and not working out enough, but that's okay.
That's okay, because you got to do it when, I think, especially it's a way to power through a lot of emotions in a healthy way. I think that's when my mom started running, was when she was going through the divorce with my dad. And she said it just allowed, she said it was just a really healthy outlook, and she didn't have any money. So she's like, I could put on some shoes and go for a jog, and it helped.
Absolutely.
Help me get through that. Now, okay. Now in the last segment, we talked a little bit about like the divorce. It wasn't finalized. I mean, in the eyes of the law, you're a widow. Now, but through probate, you guys really negotiate everything. I mean, and part of that negotiation is that some things would go to your children.
Right.
If anything still remains, that you kind of negotiated that.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think, you got to do what was right at the time. And I've been involved in some probate early on. It can be, and the thing about probate court that's different than the divorce court, it can involve a lot more than just two people. And I know in the divorce it can, but like they don't get a say as much in just a divorce. But in probate, there could be so many emotions, and many times it can make a lot of sense to do that and be able to have some closure. And that's
exactly
worth a lot. That's worth a lot, certainly.
Well, and I think too, it's just, that's probably one of the other places where being an attorney kind of helped. Because I know if you put the outcome in the hands of a judge or a jury, you're not going to guarantee the outcome. But if you can reach a settlement, the decision and the outcome, at least they're in your control. You've decided what the outcome is going to be. Even if you don't like it, you know what it is. Mm-hmm. And so I think I sit in mediations just like you with clients, and I'm oftentimes telling them, if we settle today, it's over, you have closure, and the outcome. We're not just rolling the dice. So I think that was a big part of my analysis. Let's just get this done.
Yeah. And that is important. In divorce, death, all of these things, closure in moving forward is very important. Which now we're talking about that. How did you get to a point where you could open yourself back up for dating?
Well, honestly, a friend who just kind of basically stole my phone when I wasn't looking and set up a Bumble, I think that's the app, account. And next thing I knew, I had like notifications popping up, and I almost deleted the app. But then I was like, you know what? Let's just see what happens with it for a little while. And that one is nice because it's the woman initiates the contact. So if you're a match, if you both swipe right, so cheesy, but if you both swipe right, then only the woman can start a conversation. So I was like, okay, this, I'm in control, and I'll do this. And I talked to a few people, and it was just always kind of silly. And but then I talked with Rob, who is now my fiance. He's the only person that I actually met up with. And it was just, we both knew, I think, very quickly that we had something special. And the timing was terrible. It was way too soon. Quite frankly, I felt like I wanted a year or two off, but I just decided to try and open my heart. And like I said, my friend kind of shoved me through the door.
Well, and that is a good friend. There's, and I've recognized this in particularly, like, as you know, with like close friends, but in family. But I think there comes a point when you're in a relationship that isn't working, and you can go past that point where your heart becomes so hard because of your situation that it's almost impossible to get that back. Right. And feel those feelings because you were through so much. So I'm really happy for you that it was still, you still had it in you, right? To feel that way. Yeah. Because many women I know, they maybe are going past the point of return, and they're just like, I'm not going to be able to feel that way again.
Yeah. I guess the way I looked at it, and I'm sure there's no perfect approach to this, but I think for me, you said feel that way again. And instead of looking at it like that, I try to just be open to feeling anything. Like,
yeah,
and
that's right.
I
I
didn't,
shouldn't say you want
you
to
know what I mean?
repeat those
I don't want to
things.
feel that way again, because
No.
I was 27 when I met him, right? And like, love at 40 is very different than love at 27. And so I think actually, and he and I have joked about this. I think that the love that you find after a divorce is almost, I mean, I personally think it's better because it's really intentional. Because you have had to you've gone through this horrible thing. And like a lot of us, I mean, I know people get divorced at all different ages and stages of life, but whenever you've gone through that process, if you decide, I think I'm going to date again, you're going to be so picky. Like, you're not going to put up with anything. And so if a guy can make his way through and that selection process, then I think you almost end up with this more mature type of relationship that so it doesn't feel the way it did before. It's totally different.
In that, I'm so glad that you clarified that. And I think that's just such a great statement for our listeners. So I hope listeners that, you heard that, because it's not about feeling that again. It's just like something better and more meaningful. And like you said, so much more intentional when you were out there. And I love the fact, you're not putting up with, like, those red flags are just waving clearly, right? And no, I'm not swiping right or left, I guess, right? You're like, no, that one is not getting it. I know better.
Exactly.
And when we know better, we do better. So even with dating, right?
True.
Well, this has been amazing, Kasey. I want to ask you lastly, before we go, if, you can impart on our listeners what you've learned about the divorce process, as well as, helping people and helping women through your career. And if you could share some of your wisdom.
I think probably I kind of already said it a little bit, but I think at every stage, women are so much stronger than we give ourselves credit for, than we think. And we joke about it, like with men get sick, right? And it's a man cold because it's the sniffles and they can't function for 3 days. And women just power through and still do everything we have to do. And I think if you would take those little day-to-day examples, and if you're facing separation, or if you're already going through the divorce process, or you're wondering what it's going to be like afterwards, just trust yourself. You're way stronger than you think. We are very, very powerful creatures, and find a few gurus who are further in the process than you are. That was helpful to me. I did it when I had twins. I found a twin mom who had 5-year-olds, and give me all your knowledge. And so I did the same thing when I was going through the divorce. I found people who were already further along than I was to rely on and talk to.
Well, Kasey, thank you so much. You've been so open, and I know that it's going to mean a lot to our listeners. I really am so grateful that you've been here today.
Thank you.
Well, we have reached the end of our show. And of course, and like I said, thank you so much to our guest this week, Kasey Wagner. And you can find her at baggettlaw.com. And of course, her information will be linked below in the show notes. And please keep your ears and eyes open, because we will have Kasey back, and we will talk about, personal injury cases and how those intersect with divorce and what you do with that settlement she gets you. So we will. So stay tuned for that in our future. And Kasey, thank you again. It's been a pleasure.
Absolutely. Thank you.
And if you or someone you know is going through divorce or is thinking about a divorce, of course, reach out to us at FloridaWomen'sLawGroup.com, or join our Facebook group, Women Winning Divorce, where women are able to speak about the divorce process, maybe before, during, and after. The link will be below in the episode description. And as always, we ask for a 5-star review if you enjoyed the show. Thank you for listening. From being served to preparing for trial, Divorce 101 will prepare you end to end for the divorce process. I'm Heather Quick, attorney and CEO of Florida Women's Law Group. Join us over the next 6 weeks to feel empowered and educated about a complex and often challenging legal process. Our online course is designed to provide an overview of what to expect, what to prepare for, and offer guidance you may need to succeed and win at life. Over 6 weeks of video and additional resources, we are confident that you will finish our course feeling inspired and educated. Find out more at FloridaWomen's Law Group.com/divorce-101 or call us at 904-567-0121.
Thank you for joining me for this episode of Women Winning Divorce. My goal is to elevate your life and the way you are thinking so that you are best equipped to win at life. If you enjoy the show, please subscribe so you automatically get my new shows every week. And I would love to hear from you personally. Come join the conversation on social and join our Facebook group, Women Winning Divorce. We welcome your comments and suggestions. We want to bring you content that helps move your life forward. Women Winning Divorce is the place for an elevated conversation on how women can thrive during times of adversity in order to live their best life.